Hello and welcome to the SPA London Regional Conference. My name is Chris Matthews and I'm the London SPA Regional Officer, and I'm chairing each of our three panels today. We're delighted, this is a sellout event, so thank you all very much for getting your tickets and for everyone for joining us online. This is our second panel of the day and it's about freelance journalism. I'm going to introduce our panelists. We'll have a conversation around the subject and there'll be some time for questions at the end. If you feel comfortable, you can raise your hand digitally on Zoom and we'll unmute you to ask your question, or you can write it in the chat and we'll read it out. Just so everyone is aware, the panels are being recorded as well as live streamed to the SPA YouTube channel. And just finally, the Spark 21 London Awards will be announced via Twitter this evening. So make sure you are following SPA journalism if you're not already, and turn your Twitter notifications on. Right, so our panelists. Alistair Lane is a UK-based freelance journalist. He writes for Forbes, Al Jazeera, NBC News, Vice, The Washington Post, and many others. Caroline Harrap has been a journalist for almost 20 years and freelance for the last 4. Based in Paris, she writes regularly for The Guardian, France Today, and Culture Trip, among others, and also edits travel guides. As well as being a co-founder of the Society of Freelance Journalists, she is a mentor for undergrad journalism course at Birmingham City University. Meehika Barua is an accomplished freelance journalist and speaker writing for Vogue US, The Guardian, British Vogue, Vice, Glamour, The Washington Post, and many more. She covers culture, lifestyle, and social issues, sometimes through the lens of tech and human rights. She was the winner of the Thompson Foundation's Worldwide Journalism Competition in 2018 and has spoken on many panels, including the Girl Up campaign's Talk With Me series on changing her career completely from architecture to journalism. And finally, Steve Rose is a freelance writer and editor from London. He writes regularly on culture, especially cinema, television, architecture, and design. Over the past 2 decades, his work has mainly appeared in The Guardian and The Observer, and he has also written for The FT, The Times, The Independent, Tatler, Uncut, and other titles, as well as contributing to books on architecture and cinema. So welcome to all the panelists, and I'd like to start off with each of you telling us a bit about your story, how you came to be a freelance journalist. Steve, would you like to start?
Sure. Well, I didn't start out studying journalism. I studied architecture, actually. Decided I didn't want to be an architect. Yeah. Decided I didn't want to be an architect and went off traveling. I'm not going to go through the whole history here, but basically I sort of became a journalist while I was living in Hong Kong, accidentally. And when I came back to England, I got a job freelance with The Guardian as a sub-editor on The Guide. I got a position as film editor, which was 3 days a week, which was ideal because then I could have an editorial job for 3 days a week and then use 2 days a week to freelance. So I sort of built up my freelance side of my sort of portfolio, and then went totally freelance in about 10 years ago, having sort of made the judgment that I had enough work to sustain me, which, touch wood, I have so far. That's the short history.
Brilliant. Alistair, how about you?
I did an undergrad in history, then I went and did a master's in journalism in Brunel in West London. And then I sort of fortuitously got some work experience during my master's at Sky News, and that springboarded to 3 or 4 kind of frenetic general election, cyclical Brexit referenda sort of years in the Westminster newsroom for Sky News, working as a political news editor and political producer. Then in 2018, kind of fed up of the perpetual 6:55 Piccadilly line into Westminster, and also really missing writing because I was doing, broadcast work, so I was producing TV material as opposed to writing. I decided to take the kind of maybe slightly reckless step of going away from a big organisation and striking out as a freelance writer and reporter. And I just I really built things up from there. You know, started pitching, started getting ideas together, built up a portfolio gradually over a couple of years. And as most of the people here can attest to, you know, it's slightly exponential when you start getting more work under your belt, more comes along. So yeah, that's how I've ended up doing what I do today.
Brilliant. And Meehika, how about you?
I think my story is similar to Steve's. I started with studying architecture as an undergraduate student, and then I realized I don't want to be an architect. It's too much work. Then I was just kind of, you know, going around seeing what else I can explore, and I just like took an internship at a magazine, and I really liked it. And then, you know, I studied in a sense just like off the internet what freelancing is, because I had no idea. I was like in these meetings being an intern, and people are like, oh, you know, we want this freelancer to file this story. So I learned a lot on internships, and then I was a freelance journalist after that. And I came to London in 2018 on like a fellowship with Thomson Foundation, which was in partnership with Reuters. And I was mentored by Ian McCaskill, who was the, you know, guy who broke the Snowden story, and he was at the Guardian, and he just refined what I already knew as a mentor during that fellowship. And then I sort of like have been freelance ever since then. And I think I've just branched out to a lot of you know, topics, whether it's fashion, lifestyle, whether it's, you know, reporting on migrant issues, social issues. So I don't have a beat per se, but I think that's kind of like worked for me, and I've just like branched out to everything.
Brilliant. And Caroline?
So I did English literature and language at university, and then I went on to do my training in local papers, which I still think is one of the best training grounds for young journalists today. So I did my NCTJ through the newspaper and went on to do my senior exams. And so yeah, I worked in local newspapers for a few years, and went on to do various other staff roles. I've done feature writing, editing, commissioning, and decided to go freelance 4 years ago now, and to sort of have the opportunity to write about new topics and write for different outlets. And yeah, yeah, I love freelancing. I have lots to say about the benefits of it. Thank you.
Brilliant. So I'm gonna throw this one out there. Why freelance? Why not work for a company and get a regular income? I'm going to throw that back at you, Caroline, and I'll ask everyone.
Well, I mean, the great thing about freelancing, I guess it's the clue is in the name really, is that you do have a lot of freedom. It's great to be able to shape your own day how you want it to be. You know, if you want to quickly pop to the shops or go for a jog or go for a sneaky trip to the cinema in the afternoon, you know, you can organise your time so that you can do that, and that's really nice. And also, it's kind of nice that you're away from all the office politics situation, and you don't have to worry about any mean bosses or anything like that. And so for me, I think it's the freedom and also the opportunity to you know, to tailor your work to your interests and write on lots of different topics. And ultimately, you know, there's nothing stopping you pitching your dream publications. So yeah, the sky's kind of the limit, really.
Brilliant. You look, the others look like they're nodding along in agreement. Steve, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, first of all, I was going to, yeah, the freedom of working at home is probably a freedom that pretty much everyone has now, but it used to be a real advantage of not having to go to work, but now everyone's doing it. But at the same time, when I had a job going back into the office recently, and just like commuting, you know, it always takes at least an hour to get somewhere, and you're just like, this is the hour that I was just doing my laundry and doing my washing up and, you know, clearing up. Now I'm just wasting time getting to work, and getting from work is such a waste of time. But it's also the liberty of being able to just arrange your schedule, not just your free time, but your work as well. A lot of exciting things come up that you wouldn't be able to do if you had an office job, where someone goes, can you go to Finland tomorrow or something, you know, these kind of things where you're just like, yeah, I can do that, you know, whereas if you've got a regular job, you don't have the capacity to have. So there is a bit of a, I mean, there's always probably more maybe an illusion of adventure than the reality, but there's still potential for, like, you know, unexpected things to just happen as well, which I kind of enjoy.
Brilliant. And I mean, Alistair and Meehika, do you enjoy freelancing as opposed to working in a big organization?
Absolutely,
I mean,
yeah.
I do it because.
And you go.
Oh no, you go first.
I was just going to say yes.
I was saying, I mean.
Oh, right. I insist, Meehika, on you go.
Okay. I kind of love freelancing because I tend to get bored if I'm just like at one section doing one type of story. I think the best part about freelancing is that you can write about anything and everything, whether it's travel stories, whether it's, you know, lifestyle. If you're like, you know, at a staff job, you're probably, you know, chained to one desk, and it's very difficult to diversify from there because you already have like a list of stories you need to do for your desk first before you can go to another desk and, you know, like kind of diversify. So that's one of the things. And secondly, it's definitely what Caroline said in terms of office politics. A lot of women's magazines are known to be not friendly places. Like, I mean, when I interned there, it was just like in the face mean office politics. So like, I think as a freelancer, you don't have to deal with that. And yeah, the hierarchy is just, it gets to you sometimes. So yeah.
Brilliant. And Alistair, I'll let you speak now.
So yeah, I did a good few years at a big news organisation. I think the main thing is being freelance, having the liberty to set my own hours and everything. I'm so much more creative. I felt being within the strictures of a big group and working within hierarchies really sort of constrained my creativity, and I feel the quality of the work that I put out is, you know, manifestly higher, being able to set my own deadlines within reason and sort of be able to work at my own schedule. And I'll whisper it, I think possibly you can earn more money being a freelancer. I know it's a bit controversial and not everyone does it, but I think if you crack the code, you can earn, like, your earning power is almost limitless, as opposed to obviously having a contract with a set salary. So if you really need to earn money in a pinch, if you're prepared to put in the man hours and really, you know, sort of push yourself, you can earn more being a freelancer. I think, I don't know, maybe.
We're all going to listen really closely to what you're saying now, even
Yeah.
Yeah, I want those codes.
Yeah, I'll sell you a training package.
So what advice, Steve? What advice would you give to everyone here who's, you know, watching the Zoom on how to pitch a story and make sure that pitch is accepted by editors?
Yeah, it's interesting because I never know if I'm actually any good at pitching stories, and I never really, no one's ever told me how to do it. I mean, one of the main things is whether or not you know the person that you're pitching to affects a lot how you're pitching. If it's someone that you're completely sort of cold approaching, then, you know, you will sort of possibly, the tendency is to overcompensate, but you will, you know, want to sort of like prove as much as possible that, you know, you've got this. But if it's someone that you have a relationship with, you can be a lot more sort of casual and laissez-faire about it. But I would say in general that the language you use in your pitch is going to be a measure for someone of like how good a writer you are. And if you can't explain your concept very clearly and, you know, in a way that kind of grabs their attention from the start, which is what you would seek to do in a story, I would say that, you know, that's a good way to approach pitching as well, because I've, you know, having been on the other side of it, when you read a pitch where you're just like, what's it really about? What they're really trying to say? Then you're not going to be like grabbed. Whereas if it's the first sentence, you're like, oh yeah, okay, you know, then you've got their attention. Then you can sort of expand on it. Then, you know, that's probably going to be something that makes for a good story as well. So yeah, I think it is kind of like a question of setting out your stall, but also setting out an idea. I mean, obviously the strength of the idea is what's, is what's going to guide it as well, which can be, from numerous things, from having a different angle or having an exclusive or having, something fresh and new to offer. Because I think a lot of the times I pitch stuff where it's only when someone says no to it that you think, actually, yeah, maybe that wasn't really a particularly good idea. But when you think you've got a really strong idea, then, you need to lay it out as kind of like enticingly and clearly as possible, so that people are grabbed in the same way that you hope they'd be grabbed by the eventual story.
And I'm going to ask Caroline here. We spoke a bit in our last panel a bit about pitching the same story to different people. Is that something you would do, or is it better to pitch different stories to lots of different people?
Well, everyone sort of has their own view on this, and there isn't really a right or a wrong answer, I don't think, because I know people who have had success doing both approaches. For me, I always only ever pitch one idea to one editor at a time, because for me, I think it's really important to tailor your pitch very carefully to the publication that you've chosen, because that will definitely increase your chances of getting a commission. So I think it's really worth investing the time in making sure you know the publication really well and making sure that's clear in your pitch. So, for example, you might want to suggest a section that you could see it fitting in, and maybe even a suggested headline and things like that in the style that they use. And I think also it's just really good to build relationships with editors. And I think that offering them exclusive stories is a really good way to do that, because you build a sort of level of trust and makes them feel special if you're coming to them with a story that you're only taking to that particular editor. And then obviously the dream is that then they start coming to you with commissions, which obviously makes life a lot easier rather than having to cold pitch all the time. And just lastly, and for my own sort of mental health, I just would find it too stressful to be multi-pitching, and then I'd be worried that more than one said yes and, I couldn't deliver or something. So for me, that's the way it works best.
Brilliant. And okay, so moving on a little bit, how do you all go about building your contact book? Meehika, should we start with you?
I think a lot of it is knowing how to work Twitter, like finding editors on Twitter, connecting with them, shooting them a DM, just not pitching, but just being like, hi, are you taking pictures right now? I'm a freelance journalist doing this, and I would love to, work with you in the future. I think something nice, short, subtle, and I really think, these small things kind of like help, because there are so many people pitching editors, and a lot of them are cold pitches. And for you to just, like get an insight, it's better if you have like a conversation on Twitter. I've done that so many times, and the editor has been like, yeah, just pitch me, during this time. And then I send a pitch with the headline connecting from Twitter. So they know that I'm the one they spoke to, and they're like, I don't know, I've just had luck that way. And editors just like commissions it because they've spoken to me beforehand.
Brilliant. Alistair, do you have a sort of similar way of approaching?
I would certainly agree with Meehika in terms of the research with regard to which editor to contact. When I started out, I was very naive, and I pitched to the sort of the generic submissions at or desk at, kind of inboxes, which I think more often or not are just black holes of unmonitored sort of emails. Then I realised that I had to actually send it to people. I use Twitter, I use LinkedIn a lot as well to find the specific editors in a given desk, a given department. So, if I'm pitching something which is relevant to whatever the Foreign Affairs Department, I'll ensure that I'm CCing at least 2 or 3 people who I've ascertained from LinkedIn or Twitter actually work in that desk. And I would say when I moved to that approach, maybe it was patently obvious and I should have done it in the first place. But when I moved to that approach, and my response rate, and I'm sure everyone else will agree, the benefits of getting a negative response as opposed to just being ghosted is massive. So my response rate, even if a lot of the responses were, weren't commissions, went up hugely. So definitely target your pitches at specific editors. Even if you don't know them, you're still cold pitching, but at least you can say hello, X, Y, and Z, and you'll find that your responses will go up massively.
Brilliant, thanks. And Caroline, you mentioned earlier sometimes it's nice to get away from all the office politics as a freelancer. But do you find sometimes it can, do you miss being in a newsroom and having other people to bounce your ideas off? Does it get lonely at all being a freelancer?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. It can be incredibly isolating as a freelancer, and I do miss the sense of community that you get from being in a newsroom or magazine office. And in fact, that was one of the things I think that was most important for me when I started out. I suddenly realized that I really still needed that sense of community. And I think that is really important. And luckily, there are lots of ways that you can tap into different kinds of networks. So there's the Society of Freelance Journalists, which I'm involved with, where we offer, and Meehika is too. We offer, free training and lots of advice and help and solidarity. It's all free as well at the moment anyway. And and then there's also lots of groups on Facebook that you can tap into, and various WhatsApp groups, if you don't mind having about 1 million notifications. And again, on Twitter, for me, I just find I love connecting with other journalists on Twitter and interacting, and that's kind of how I get my fix of being by the water cooler, but not really,
Brilliant. And so, Meehika, how do you go about making sure, especially you get to meet other journalists and get to have that social side of the career?
I think I kind of mix it up with people who are, at the same stage in their careers as me. So I'll connect with that crowd on Facebook, because young people or young journalists are mostly on Facebook. When I need something very specific in terms of advice, I definitely go to Society of Freelance Journalists Slack, because everyone's either 5 years ahead of me or 10 years ahead of me, and it's just very good advice whenever I need to talk about contracts or something problematic, and I know that I need sort of a senior journalist's advice. But yeah, Facebook groups, Twitter, I think it's just really important to balance out. You also need to be friends with people who are at the same stage in their career as yours, because you're just throwing off ideas. Sometimes when I'm sick of looking at my draft, I just send another freelancer a message that, hey, do you want to swap drafts, give some comments, look for typos, because I'm just sick of looking at my draft, and we do that. So I think that community is really important. I don't think you can be a successful freelance journalist without that community. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you. Yeah. And so, Alistair, you mentioned before that you need to be very organized to be a freelance journalist to get those commissions rolling in. Are you just at a sort of constant state of worry about where the next commission is going to come from, where the next payment is going to come from, or do you have a sort of process?
I think that worry is there at the start, and I think it can actually be constructive, because it fires you up, and if you're determined to make a career out of freelance, you do need to be on it 24/7. You really need to be psyched and ready to work whenever you can. It takes a wee while, but I think when you find your rhythm, and particularly if you find regular gigs, sort of routine work, that worry does fade away, because you've done so many months, so many years of it. I've not done that many. I've done sort of two and a bit years now. but you start to realise that sooner or later you will get a commission. Sooner or later this will come in, this will come in, these little ideas will come together, a story will come up which you do have an insight on, which you're confident that a particular editor will commission. So I think like most things, the more you do it, the easier it becomes, and the more you sort of trust yourself to bring the money in, and I think that anxiety does disappear after a couple of months, after a couple of years. And at least speaking for myself, even the big upset in the industry, well, in all industries, in March last year, when the pandemic hit and freelance budgets, as is often the case, were the first to be cut. That was the first time in a wee while I'd felt, what's going to happen here financially. But the commissions kept coming in, and things do often just keep ticking along. But you do certainly need to be proactive, and you can't become complacent, because you lose out otherwise. There's always other younger, hungrier journalists pitching stories constantly. So that's a feature of freelance. You are dispensable in a way, so you do need to keep working.
And is there a sort of, do you have a kind of set amount of stories you want to write per month? Obviously the change in rates, but do you always aim to have written, X amount of stories per month?
I'm terribly mercenary, I'm afraid. I have a monetary figure that I aim to make each month, and because I feel with the stories, I might be knocking out 20 pretty rubbish stories, to make up hours. Rather, I'd write 5, real kind of, crafted pieces. So I have a monetary figure in my head, and whichever route I take to reach that, I'm generally happy with.
Is that the same for everyone else? It sort of sounds similar.
Yeah, I'm quite similar in terms of like, you need to earn this much to pay the rent, and if you're not earning it one way, you better find another way. But at the same time, I don't know if everyone would agree, but I'm not particularly very organized about the workflow, because there's so much that you can't really control about it. That that it'll be a famine or a feast, or everything will pile up at once, and it's very hard for you to be able to just like nicely space out work in a steady flow, which would be the ideal, but it never quite works out like that. So I think there's a certain amount of like having to kind of negotiate week to week in terms of like how much you can do, and there's periods where you're really, really busy and suddenly it's all piled up at once because you didn't say no to anything. And there's periods where you're twiddling your thumbs and just sort of like, racking your brains and stuff. And I think that is something you probably have to accept as part of the freelance life, that there is a lot of uncertainty, and it's about trying to minimize that uncertainty, which is often about having people who ask you back, and regular things, which I found is like, even if it's like, I do a weekly column, and it's good to just have something as one, it might not even be a whole day's work, but just something that happens regularly that you don't need to spend the energy trying to drum up every week. So it's about trying to manage it, but with the enjoy the unpredictability, but sometimes the unpredictability is a complete nightmare as well, and that's just part and parcel of the package, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, and do you try and keep in contact with your sort of editors that you've worked with on a regular basis, even if you're not thinking about writing for them that sort of week, that day?
Personally, you want to avoid kind of like being a stalker to people and like, oh hi, it's me again, when actually they're just like, what, I'm busy, and like, so I tend not, maintaining relationships is often about having stories, having regular things to bring them. Rather than trying to like be their friend, I mean, I think a lot of the time it's sort of like, it's a professional relationship, but it's often, a sort of like a personal relationship as well. But I think you've got to be thinking about how you're useful to them, as well as how useful they are to you. And, from an editor's point of view, the ideal kind of freelancer, I suppose, is one that makes them look good, and one that makes, that does stuff that finds them the stories that they don't have to go out and look for because someone's brought it to them, and that they don't have to work on because you've written it so brilliantly that they don't have to do a thing to it, which would be ideal.
Brilliant. I'm going to ask a fun one now. What are all your top tips for people starting out in the industry? Caroline, I'm gonna start with you, if that's all right.
Oh gosh, well, yeah, there's so many things that you could share for people starting out, and it is definitely a big learning curve when you do first begin. I suppose maybe if I just said my biggest tip, which would be again the community thing. So it just makes such a difference if you have someone that you can ask questions for, or if you're in a group where you can see what other people are talking about and giving advice to each other. So again, I'm sorry to bang on about my thing, which is the Society of Freelance Journalists, but we have a Slack channel, and so if someone's got a problem or something, they can ask the community, what do you think about this? And everybody shares ideas and advice. And but there's, as I said, there's places on Facebook too for that. And yeah, so just those things, connecting with other journalists, which I know the others were saying too, and then you've always got someone you can talk to if you get stuck.
Thanks. And Meehika, do you want to add, what are your top tips?
I think my top tip would be make sure your draft is very clean. And I did like a tweet on this, which also got viral. And I just feel like everyone knows this, that, you know, your draft is supposed to be clean, but they don't like make sure that it's very, very, very accurate. Why I say this, because if you want an editor to come back to you with assignments, it's very important that you proofread your draft, make sure there are no typos, no grammatical errors, sentence, you know, structures which are awkward or weird. Read out your draft at least 2 times or once at least before filing. I say this because I like during the first few weeks or months of my freelance career, I didn't know this, and editors were very nice to me, but some of them just told me your draft is like shit, and I didn't understand what that meant. I went to my mentor and I'm like, editors told me to file a clean draft, what does that mean? And then my mentor told me what it means. It doesn't mean that your editor won't edit your story. It means like there is very less work for them. They don't have to change a lot of things. Your sentence structures are clear, concise. There's no, you know, unwanted color that isn't like the publication style, things like that. So I think because I really understood that from my mentor, like he sat with me for like half an hour telling me what things were wrong and what weren't working. I think because of that, and literally because of that, I've had editors come back to me now with assignments every time I file, because, you know, they're like, there were very little changes that we did to your draft. And I think that's so important. I can't stress that enough. It's made a huge difference to my freelance career.
Brilliant. And Alistair, what's your top tip?
I would say don't worry too much in the early days about getting big commissions. You know, sort of almost the flip side of this wonderful online community is that people can be sharing all these amazing commissions I've had at these big titles. Don't get despondent, don't get worried. But by not getting those, it's not a sort of a reflection on your work. You don't need to get commissioned by a big name for validation. Well, what I think you're much better doing, you know, personally what I ended up doing is I spent about a year working fairly consistently for a relatively small English language Italian publication, and that allowed me to build up my confidence in my writing. So I come out of working in TV, it allowed me to build up a portfolio, which is really important. And at the time I felt, you know, oh Christ, this is rubbish. I'm not getting any big names, you know, I'm not getting any big titles under my belt. I'm never ever going to move up the ladder if I don't get some of these heavyweights to publish me. But as long as you're writing and you're building a portfolio and you're building your skills, don't worry about where your work's ending up, you know, within reason. As long as it's going somewhere, it's getting published somewhere, and, you know, vitally you're getting paid, you know, an acceptable amount for it. Don't get despondent in the early days about not getting big commissions. That'll come in time. Get your skills up, become a good writer, become adept at finding an interesting angle in a story, and all the glitz and glamour and the big titles, they'll come along eventually.
Brilliant. And Steve, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with what everyone's saying, and especially like you were saying, Alistair, is like just if you keep writing, even if it's not not going where you want it to, in the titles that you want to, you're still writing and you're getting better at it. And no one's born a brilliant writer. I think we could all agree. The longer you spend doing it, the better you get, and the more you look back at stuff you wrote years ago and think, oh God, that wasn't very good. But also you just get feedback from being edited, and you learn what people you get the sort of like the education by doing it. Also, I would say in general, I'm sure this doesn't apply to everyone, but no one ever wants to hear how difficult it was for you, and no one wants to hear how hard it was at work, and no one wants you to just not deliver. So just about not flaking out on people, I think, and just I mean, having been an editor, where you'd be amazed how flaky contributors can be, where they're just like, oh, I was going to do that, but it was a bit cold that night, so I didn't go out. That kind of like, no one wants to hear about anything about how hard it was. What they want is for you to have like solved all the problems, and to to have been a step ahead, and to make sure that you've got something, and don't leave them empty-handed. Give them more than they want. I don't know about other people, but in terms of like word count and copy and stuff, I always give people a bit more than what they ask for, because there's always a chance they'll print more of it and you'll get paid more. So I just think in every aspect, try and give people more than they asked for, because they might see something more, and might ask you to do something more because of that.
And actually, you mentioned the main thing about it is making sure you're getting paid as well. I mean, how often do you? Maybe later on in your career, it's not so much of a problem, but how often do you get editors that just don't want to pay you, or just don't even offer, or anything like that? Caroline, shall I come to you?
Well, I think I've perhaps been quite fortunate in that I haven't really had that scenario where someone's asked me to write for free. And I think it's really important not to write for free as well, tempting though it is when you're first starting out, because I think it devalues what we all do, and also I think that morally speaking, if a story's worth printing, then a publication should pay for it, really. So if you are like starting out from scratch with no bylines, then instead I would suggest publishing a blog or some things on Medium, or even starting your own newsletter, just so that you've got something to show, to sort of demonstrate your writing ability, I guess. Yeah,
and Meehika, how about you? Is that something, I can see you nodding along as well. What do you think about it?
I mean, I was asked by a Glamour UK editor to write for free when I was early in, like my freelance career, and I'm glad I didn't do it because I had bylines by then. But if I didn't have bylines, like Caroline said, I probably would have done it. So I think kind of like knowing when someone's like giving you an opportunity and differentiating it with when someone's exploiting you is very important. If you have absolutely no bylines, there are tons of places that pay less, but they still pay. Like there are a lot of publications. You can, do that, or you can, of course, write free articles, but just have like a set number that, oh, okay, I'll do 2 of them for free, not more than that, just to get that byline. So like knowing where to stop is important. Like don't write 10 articles for free, definitely not. Yeah.
And obviously the elephant in the room is the pandemic. How has the pandemic changed your jobs? Alistair, how's it changed your life, really?
Well, I still sit here in a hoodie. I work every day from home, which is great. So I guess in a practical kind of logistical sense, it's not really changed things, although obviously going out and when you're doing sort of newsy, reported features, obviously, like all reporting, well, like any activity beyond the front door has changed. There was, as I said before, there was a wee bit of anxiety early on in the pandemic. Well, actually, no, there was a strange bit in March where they just couldn't commission enough. There's so much news, but then people, editors and higher up started to worry about budgets going forward if there's some great, historic recession. So the freelance budget started to go, and that was a bit hairy for a couple of weeks, maybe even a month. But then I found it sort of plateaued and it was okay. I'm probably not long enough in the game to say this authoritatively, but I would like to think that freelance work is sort of like a bit like the stock market, where there will be drops, but it will always rise over time. Or you will keep working over time. If you're working, you will keep profiting over time. Maybe that's outrageously optimistic, but I feel that regardless of the circumstances, if you're committed, you're dedicated, there is work out there. People are still consuming media. People are consuming media more than they've ever consumed media, and somebody needs to produce it. So if you stick at it, global pandemic or otherwise, I think you still will be able to eke out a career and hopefully more than eke it out, hopefully prosper.
And how much does sort of location matter? Where you're based in the world? Obviously, we're all actually in different cities, different countries at the moment. I mean, Paris, India. Caroline, how's it working in Paris when a lot of the time you're writing for British publications?
Well, I suppose for my part, that's kind of what I do to some extent, is write for British publications about Paris and wider France. But I do other things too. And I think one thing to say, which has been a positive thing that's come out of this strange time, is that the fact that everything's moved online pretty much almost completely has meant that actually it doesn't really matter where you are now. And I think it's a really great thing actually, because it means that everybody's able to attend training sessions like we are today, which maybe this would have once taken place in a venue somewhere in London or something. So it means that it's opened up opportunities to journalists all over the UK, whereas maybe before things were a little bit more London centric. So to answer the question, I think actually it doesn't really matter where you are now. You can always find interesting stories where you are, and you can always network online. And so I think that's kind of been a positive of the lockdown time.
Yeah, Meehika, how about you? I mean, how is India, by the way, with the pandemic?
I mean, my stories are mostly, on global topics, because I write for American publications as well as British and sometimes for European publications. So because of that, I tend to stick to stories that are very globally relevant. And this is again coming back to what we're talking about, simultaneous pitching as well. Sometimes I will have a pitch that I send a British publication, and if they say no, I can refine and tweak it and kind of send it to like an American publication. And that helps rather than, sticking or writing stories about India. I mean, I used to do investigative social issues, reporting hard news stuff before, but I think because of the pandemic, it's very hard. So I kind of like stick to stories that will be commissioned by any publication, irrelevant of where I'm located.
Brilliant. Right, now I'm going to open up the conversation now to our viewers on Zoom. So if anyone has a question, they can raise your hand digitally on Zoom and you can ask it, or if you put a question in the chat, we'll read it out, so get typing. But in the meantime, I've got a question of my own actually. Is it a lifestyle choice to be freelance? Steve?
To a certain extent, yes, because I left a job in editorial to go freelance, which is usually the way around it is, and I guess if I wanted to go back into, you know, working in an office or being editorial, the option is always there. You could always do it if, you know. So I guess in that extent, to that extent, although I guess hopefully any career that you're doing that you want to do is to some extent, you know, going to be your lifestyle choice. Although there are lots of aspects about it as a lifestyle which are not necessarily what you'd really want in an ideal world. But I think as well, one of the things that we hadn't really talked about is that in a way going freelance is a way of opening up your options to going in a different direction entirely. For example, you know, writing books or writing, you know, sort of like other kind of forms of it. So it's a way of kind of opening up your options so that if something else comes along, you're free to pursue it. So in that respect, it's a bit of a, it's a way of kind of like, you know, removing kind of like limitations that might have been there from having, you know, an office job or a regular job or a more permanent job. So in that respect, it's sort of I think, you know, it's sort of opening up potential, which is, you know, not necessarily about the here and now, it's also about the future.
Brilliant. And we've got a question from Rhiannon Jenkins. You've all had quite expansive careers in terms of subjects covered. How have you shaped your niche, or alternatively avoided being pigeonholed? Meehika, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have given me mixed advice on this when I was starting out. Many people said have a niche, and others said don't have a niche and just diversify as much as you can. And I think the latter has worked for me. I don't have a niche. I write about anything and everything, and that's worked quite well for me. But even if you don't want to diversify in terms of like journalism, if you want to write one type of stories, or like, you know, if you have one specialized topic, make sure you diversify it in terms of like, I don't know, like working with organizations and copywriting for them or reporting for them rather than just publications. I don't know a lot about copywriting and gigs like that, but a lot of people like mix it with journalism. So either diversify on the type of work you do or diversify on journalism itself. But I think it's very important in today's day and age to not be, you know, like sticking to one niche. So, I mean, yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Alistair, is there anything you want to add to that? What do you think?
Remind me what the question was again?
So you've all had very expansive careers. Have you sort of shaped a niche, or have you tried to
yeah,
expand?
I think, you know, it would be dangerous. That's not the right word. It would perhaps be not the best for your career longevity if you were sort of a one-trick pony. If you really were just looking at one very specific area. I think it's completely legitimate to specify 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5 different things. What I suppose slightly tangential to this is I think it's important to have different revenue streams. I'm sure everyone will agree with that here, that you can't only write about one issue for even a couple of publications, because if that particular issue just has a bit of a dip in terms of newsworthiness, you're scunnered. You know, to use a Scottish expression, you're really in the doldrums. So definitely diversify your earning streams. And I think, yeah, I would say probably on balance, you're best to have as diverse a portfolio when you're a freelancer, because you know you're always out there hunting. You're always looking for work. Very rarely is somebody going to bring work to you. So you need to have a few hunting grounds, if you will.
Thanks. And we've just got another question from Lakshmi. Do pitch forms ever work, or are you better off reaching out to the editor despite a directive to use the pitch form? I'll go to Meehika perhaps on this one.
I didn't get the question. Can you repeat that?
So instead of I think it's sometimes editors ask to fill out the pitch in a kind of online form. Do you prefer to do that, or do you just email
I
them?
don't do that. No, I think I try my very best to find the editor on that section. But then again, there are some editors who want all pitches to go to one, email ID. Like the Business Insider has like this opinion section. So does the Guardian, and they want all pitches on that email. So if they've specifically said that time and again, it's worth it to do that. But I personally try and CC one editor on that section. That really helps because those emails or pitch forms are monitored by a lot of people. They are mostly clogged. Your pitches, they might get missed. So I won't recommend it. But if there's no other, source, then definitely do that. But first try to just like find the editor on that desk.
Brilliant. I've got another question from me actually. Caroline, I'm going to ask this to you. What do you find is the most difficult part of your job as a freelance journalist?
What's the most difficult thing? I mean, well, there are challenges definitely, and especially sort of with rates. Like rates haven't really increased very much over the past few years, and there's a lot of competition, and sadly there's been a lot of redundancies during the pandemic. So there's a lot of freelancers out there competing for the same gigs. But I think that if you're really determined, you can absolutely deal with those things and find a way through. And and then it is a really rewarding, enjoyable career choice. And I'd highly recommend it.
So, Steve, how about you? Is there any one part of freelancing that you find the most difficult?
I mean, yes, the uncertainty brings with it a lot of diverse myriad anxieties, as we discussed. And I think it's often, sometimes you might either have a sense that you're kind of like rubbish because no one's commissioning you, or sometimes you might have it can be a slightly false sense of security as opposed to having a salary, in that there are things that you're not getting paid for that you would in a salary, like holiday pay or like healthcare or like pensions and things like that. So I think you have to factor in that all those things are things you're not getting because you're just doing a freelance thing. And so I think it's quite easy. I think you need to calculate the economic sort of like, costs and, benefits a bit more carefully. And I think it might be easy. I think in my early career, I hadn't really sort of figured out how much I was really earning until I got my tax bill, and then thought, oh God, yeah, no, I haven't been putting away enough, so you have to kind of manage your kind of, your affairs. If you have a job, and with a salary, it's just kind of like a lot of stuff is taken care of. That as a freelancer, you kind of need to be on top of, which kind of, takes a bit of resources and takes a bit of, dedication, but also it's kind of, you need to be aware of what you're getting into, I think. And if nothing else, in order to make the calculation of whether it's worth devoting more of your time to freelancing or worth taking a particular commission that doesn't pay much, for example.
Yeah, Meehika, did you want to add something there?
I mean, I think for me, the biggest challenge is when I'm not able to place a story that's timely, because you kind of like have to wait till one editor gets back to you and then you can pitch again. So I think that's like a lot of times I've missed out on stories, and I see other publications and, placing or writing the same stories. And that just kind of like makes me really angry. So I think in those cases, it's worth sending to a couple of places and letting them know that you are simultaneously pitching and that you will be giving the story to whoever comes to you first, or just saying like, I'm going to pitch this elsewhere in 4 hours if I don't hear from you. Because I think I burned out a lot doing that in the first few years or months. And I just like, now I make sure if the story is timely, it is placed.
Brilliant. And Alistair, I'll finish with you. what do you find most difficult about freelancing?
I think you have to have a lot of resolve, because you will go through troughs in terms of commissions, and sort of inexplicably, I knew 3 or 4 kind of shoe-in commissions you thought, pictures you thought really would get picked up, just don't. And you need to try and not overthink it, and you need to kind of roll with that punch and just get on with it, because it's a bit of a marathon. You can't just stop and lick your wounds and sort of really mourn. I've had a couple of cracking stories just not ever come to anything, and it's difficult because you're invested in your career and your work, and if they're human interest stories, you probably get people whose story you want to tell, and it doesn't come to fruition. So I think you need to have mettle. You need to be able to just dust yourself off and keep going and try not to take it personally. That's something I'm getting better at, definitely, but still it's perhaps it's kind of slightly hubris or whatever. But if just an editor, even a series of editors, aren't seeing what you think they should be seeing, that's maybe a bit of a lesson to you that the story isn't actually that great, and you just need to drop it and you need to move on, because there will always be other stories. There will always be more stuff to cover. So you need to be prepared to sort of bury some stuff and just keep moving forward.
Brilliant. Thank you all very much. So I'm afraid we've come to the end of the session, and it's been a fantastic discussion, and thank you so much to all our panelists for sharing their experience and views. It was so interesting. And thanks to everyone watching at home as well. And I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please do tweet us at SPA Journalism on Twitter. Tell us how fantastic it was, please do. Our next panel begins at 4 p.m. and is about moving beyond print and diversifying your skills. And we'll be hearing from Adi Adepitan, James Toney, Jenny Kleeman, and Justin Webb. We'll see you then. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.